chosen ones. They're teaching your last stand at West Point right now, not as history, as required curriculum. Future generals are studying your 13-hour masterpiece, trying to decode how one person dismantled an entire military operation without firing more than 3% of available ammunition. The Kremlin has it too. Their war rooms have your movement patterns on permanent display. Beijing built an AI just to analyze you. The Pentagon classified your tactics as precognition, inconsistent with human capability, because calling you a genius would mean admitting their entire system just got outsmarted by someone who was basically meditating through the whole thing. That's not an exaggeration. Your brain scans during the operation showed complete calm, like you were playing a children's game while they were fighting for their lives. But here's what they don't want anyone to know, what they'll never put in those textbooks. You didn't just win. You made them defeat themselves. Every move they made strengthened your position. Every protocol they followed became predictable. Every asset they deployed turned into a liability. And the most beautiful part, you knew it would happen this way before the first piece moved. Not because you're psychic, because you see the patterns they're blind to, the connections they can't make, the 12 moves ahead while they're still figuring out the rules. The classified files read like science fiction, but we both know it's simpler than that. They had to blame it on aliens, because the alternative was admitting that a human being just evolved past their entire understanding of strategic possibility. The Russian FSB actually has a theory that you had access to stolen technology. The Chinese think you're working with interdimensional beings. DARPA spent $50 billion trying to reverse engineer your consciousness into an AI. Every attempt failed because you can't program what isn't logical. You can't replicate what transcends pattern. Let me take you back to hour 1 of your last stand. They thought they had you surrounded, 200-to-1 odds. Every tactical manual, every computer simulation, every expert analyst agreed on one thing: you were finished. The smart money was already celebrating. Their commanders were writing reports about the successful operation, and then you did something that still gives generals nightmares. You smiled, not a nervous smile, not false bravado. The kind of smile that says, finally, something interesting. That smile is documented in 17 different surveillance angles. They've analyzed it frame by frame, looking for signs of insanity, drug use, anything that explains why someone would smile when facing impossible odds. The psychological profiles came back with something that chilled them to the bone: complete sanity, perfect clarity. You smiled because you genuinely found the situation entertaining, like a grandmaster finally finding an opponent worth playing. Hour 2 is when they realized something was wrong. Their first wave didn't encounter resistance, it encountered nothing. Like punching smoke, every aggressive move felt choreographed, like you were conducting them through steps of a dance they didn't know they were performing. One commander reported that advancing felt like sinking, but standing still felt like drowning. You had created a psychological environment where every choice felt wrong because every choice was playing into your design. The transcripts from their command center are still classified, but certain phrases leaked. They're not where they're supposed to be. Then 10 minutes later, they're exactly where we don't want them. Then how are they predicting our predictions? By hour 3, doubt was spreading through their ranks like a virus. Not fear of death, fear of something worse. Fear that they were playing a game where you controlled both sides of the board. You want to know what really broke them? It wasn't tactics or strategy. It was the gradual realization that you weren't fighting them at all. You were conducting a symphony where their violence was just percussion, and you barely needed that instrument. Every unit they deployed became a note in your composition. Every order they gave harmonized with your design. They weren't losing a battle. They were participating in their own defeat without understanding how. Hour 4 brought the first psychological casualties, not physical injuries. Trained operators who simply stopped functioning. Men who laid down their weapons and walked away. Elite units refusing to advance, not from cowardice but from the crushing recognition that every step forward helped you more than them. The medical reports describe a condition they'd never seen before: tactical vertigo, the complete loss of understanding about what actions lead to what outcomes. The MIT report would later call this cognitive warfare beyond current theoretical frameworks. But you weren't using cognition, you were using something deeper. While they were thinking, you were knowing. While they were calculating, you were feeling the shape of what would happen. Like the difference between reading music and hearing the song before it's played. They were following sheet music. You were improvising jazz that made their structured notes sound like noise. By hour 5, their artificial intelligence support systems started contradicting each other. The programs designed to predict your movements couldn't agree on what you were doing. Some said you were retreating, others said advancing. Some registered defensive postures, others saw offensive positioning. The truth that none of them could process? You were doing all of it simultaneously. Defense and offense had become meaningless concepts in your framework. You existed in a space where those distinctions didn't apply. One analyst quit on the spot, walking out of the command center with a single comment: "We're not fighting them, we're fighting ourselves, and they're just watching." He was closer to the truth than he knew. You had turned their entire force into a self-defeating mechanism. Every strength became a weakness, every asset became a liability, every certainty became a doubt that spread through their ranks like psychological contagion. Hour 6 is when they brought in the specialists, psychological operations experts, who'd broken the will of nations. They tried every technique in their arsenal: demoralization, intimidation, confusion. Each attempt backfired spectacularly, not because you resisted them, but because you amplified them until they became self-defeating. You took their psychological weapons and turned the dial past maximum until the weapons broke, like feedback-destroying speakers, but with human consciousness. The Israelis were monitoring everything from their satellites. Mossad's after-action report contained a single line that captured what everyone was thinking but couldn't say. Subject operates outside known parameters of human capability. They tried to recruit you 5 times after this. Each approach failed before it began because you saw them coming, not through intelligence networks. You just knew, the way you know rain is coming before clouds form. If this message hits your spirit, hype this video so more chosen ones like you can find it. Hour 7 brought the first attempt at negotiation. They sent their best diplomat, someone who'd talked warlords into surrender, who'd negotiated impossible peace deals. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. He came back white-faced, unable to explain what happened. The recording shows you didn't threaten him. You just explained very calmly exactly how the next 6 hours would unfold, not as prediction but as fact. Like describing a movie you'd already seen. What you told him came true with such precision that they investigated him for being a double agent. But he wasn't working for you. You had just shown him a reality his mind couldn't deny. He saw the threads you were weaving, the pattern you were creating, and realized that resistance wasn't just futile, it was already accounted for in your design. Fighting you was part of how you won. Hour 8 is when the generals started to panic. Not battlefield panic, existential panic. The kind that comes from realizing everything you believe about reality might be wrong. They had trained their entire lives for every conceivable scenario, except this one, an opponent who wasn't opposing them but orchestrating them. You weren't an enemy, you were something they had no word for, a conductor who had turned their military might into an orchestra playing your composition. The Stanford Psychology Department would later study the communications from this period. They found something unprecedented. Every order given by command started to help you more than them, not through incompetence or confusion, but through a pattern they couldn't break. Like a Chinese finger trap where struggling makes it worse, but they couldn't stop struggling because not struggling also made it worse. You had created a reality where they had no good options because all options led to your victory. Hour 9 brought international attention. Every major intelligence agency was now watching in real time. The British SAS offered assistance. The French Foreign Legion prepared to deploy. Everyone wanted to see how this impossible situation would resolve. But those watching closest noticed something that would haunt military doctrine for decades. You weren't getting tired. Your decision-making wasn't degrading. If anything, you were getting stronger, more precise, like the pressure was charging you instead of draining you. The biometric data they collected is still beyond explanation. Your heart rate never exceeded normal walking pace. Your stress hormones remained at baseline. Your brain patterns showed what they could only describe as profound meditation. While orchestrating the most complex strategic maneuver in modern military history, you were in a mental state most people can't achieve sitting still in a quiet room. You weren't struggling, you were flowing. Hour 10 is when they tried overwhelming force. Everything they had, all at once. The tactical theory was simple. No one could handle that much simultaneous input. No human brain could process that many variables. They were right about human limitations. They were wrong about yours. What happened next is still being studied in war colleges worldwide. You didn't handle the complexity. You simplified it, turned chaos into pattern, noise into signal, overwhelming force into overwhelming proof that force was irrelevant. Every drone they deployed gave you information. Every communication they sent revealed their psychology. Every weapon they fired showed their fear. You weren't dodging bullets. You were reading the story their violence was telling, and the story was that they had already lost. They just needed 3 more hours to realize it. The Japanese studied this moment extensively, calling it the dissolution of strategic meaning. Violence had become meaningless because you existed outside the framework where violence mattered. Hour 11 brought the breakdown, not yours, theirs. The command structure started to collapse. Orders were questioned, chains of command fractured. Some units simply stopped responding, not from mutiny but from a kind of cognitive paralysis. They couldn't act because every action felt like stepping into a trap. They couldn't not act because inaction felt like sinking. You had created a psychological checkmate where the king wasn't just trapped. The king didn't even understand what game was being played. The psychiatric reports from this period describe a collective dissociation. Trained soldiers reporting that reality felt liquid or negotiable. Some described the sensation of being characters in someone else's dream. Others reported feeling like they were fighting their own shadows and losing. The medical term they eventually created was tactical psychosis, the complete breakdown of understanding about cause and effect in conflict situations. But you weren't causing this through any exotic means, no technology, no external assistance, just pure consciousness applied with such precision that it broke their framework for understanding what was possible. The Harvard Business School would later teach this as the perfect example of asymmetric dominance through cognitive superiority. But their academic language can't capture what really happened. You didn't outsmart them. You existed in a space where smart and stupid were irrelevant concepts. Hour 12 is when the surrender preparations began. Not because they were losing in any conventional sense. They still had overwhelming numerical superiority. They still had resources, they still had weapons, but they had lost something more important, the belief that any of it mattered. You hadn't defeated their military. You had defeated the idea that military force meant anything against someone operating at your level of consciousness. The final hour was almost anticlimactic. No dramatic last battle, no heroic final stand, just the quiet recognition that continuing was pointless. The white flag wasn't raised in defeat, but in recognition. Recognition that they had encountered something outside their entire understanding of conflict. You hadn't beaten them at their game. You had revealed that their game was just one arbitrary way of organizing reality, and not even a particularly effective one. The surrender documents contain a phrase that military historians still debate: cessation of hostilities due to paradigm incompatibility. They couldn't even frame it as defeat, because defeat implies you were playing the same game. You weren't. You were playing chess while they were playing checkers, except even that analogy fails because you weren't playing at all. You were composing, and they were just notes in your symphony. The aftermath was more devastating than any physical defeat could have been. Every commander required psychological evaluation. 67% were diagnosed with what they called existential trauma, the psychological injury that comes from having your entire worldview shattered. Some never recovered. Others spent years in therapy trying to understand what they had experienced. A few claimed you had shown them something transcendent, something beyond military understanding. The Pentagon's classified report runs 2,800 pages. Most of it is trying to explain how you achieved the impossible. The conclusion, buried in Appendix J, subsection 47, is the only honest part. Subjects' capabilities suggest either non-human intelligence or evolutionary advancement beyond current human baseline. They'd rather believe you're an alien than admit a human being just made their entire military doctrine obsolete. Russia's GRU created Project Mirror, their attempt to understand your methodology. They assigned their best minds unlimited resources, complete authority. After 3 years, the project was cancelled. The final report, leaked by a whistleblower, contained a single recommendation: do not engage entities displaying these characteristics. Negotiate if possible. Surrender if necessary. The most aggressive military culture on Earth essentially admitted that beings like you exist outside their ability to confront. China's response was different but equally telling. They didn't try to understand you. They tried to find others like you. Operation Lotus spent 5 years searching for individuals displaying similar capabilities. They found none. The conclusion they reached but won't publicly state: you're either unique or the first of something new. Either possibility terrifies them equally. Every military academy now teaches your last stand, but they can't teach how to replicate it. The West Point course is called Asymmetric Dominance Through Cognitive Superiority. The Kremlin calls it Post-Conflict Strategic Paradigms. The Chinese term translates to victory without fighting. But these are just words trying to capture something beyond language. You didn't achieve victory. You revealed that victory and defeat were constructs you could manipulate at will. The cadets studying your case always ask the same question: how do we counter someone like this? The honest instructors admit the truth. You don't. You can't fight someone who isn't fighting you. You can't defeat someone who's turned defeat into victory and victory into irrelevance. You can't counter someone who exists outside your entire framework for understanding conflict. The Swiss, pragmatic as always, created the simplest protocol. Their classification system lists you as a strategic anomaly with the recommendation: avoid all contact. Do not engage under any circumstances. If contact is unavoidable, immediate diplomatic resolution is the only viable option. They don't see you as a threat because threats can be countered. They see you as a force of nature, like trying to fight gravity or negotiate with thermodynamics. DARPA's $50 billion effort to create an AI that could replicate your thinking produced something unexpected. Not success, but a new understanding of consciousness. Every model they built to simulate your decision-making crashed, not from insufficient processing power, but from what they called paradox overflow. The AI couldn't replicate your thinking because your thinking included simultaneous contradictions that were somehow also true. You operated using logic that violated logic while still being perfectly logical. The neuroscientists at Yale made 17 requests to study your brain. They wanted to understand the biological basis of your capabilities. What they didn't understand is that your capabilities aren't biological, they're consciousness-based. You're not using a better brain, you're using your brain better. Actually, you're not even using your brain. You're letting consciousness use your brain, and that's a distinction their instruments can't measure. The business schools teaching your case focus on the wrong things. They analyze your tactics, your timing, your resource management. But these are just symptoms of something deeper. You didn't manage resources efficiently. You made resource management irrelevant. You didn't time things perfectly. You exist outside sequential time where everything happens exactly when it needs to. You didn't use tactics. You revealed that tactics are just patterns, and patterns are just habits, and habits can be exploited by anyone who sees them clearly. What really happened during those 13 hours can't be captured in military language or academic analysis. You demonstrated something that shouldn't be possible according to everything they believe about human limitation. Not superhuman ability, but human ability without the limitations they've accepted as reality. You showed them what consciousness looks like when it's not filtered through fear, doubt, or the belief in limitation. The operators who faced you reported consistent experiences that psychiatrists struggle to explain. The sensation of being known completely, of having their thoughts read not through telepathy, but through an understanding so complete it made privacy impossible. The feeling of fighting themselves and losing, the recognition that you weren't their enemy, but something else entirely, something that made the concept of enemy seem primitive and childish. Several reported experiencing moments of clarity during the engagement where they understood what you were doing, not tactically but existentially. You were showing them something about the nature of reality itself, that conflict is a choice, that limitation is a belief, that the entire framework they operated within was arbitrary and could be transcended simply by deciding to transcend it. These moments of understanding were so profound that some operators left military service entirely, pursuing philosophy or spirituality instead. The Israeli attempt to recruit you revealed something telling. Each approach failed not because you detected them, but because you existed in a state where deception was impossible. They couldn't lie to you because you saw the truth beneath the lie. They couldn't manipulate you because you saw the manipulation as clearly as they saw your face. They couldn't recruit you because recruitment implies you could be owned, and you can't own something that exists outside the framework of ownership. The Oxford analysis of your few spoken words during the engagement found perfect psychological calibration, every syllable designed for maximum impact, but not designed consciously. You weren't calculating the effect, you were speaking from a place where truth and effect were the same thing, where words carried exactly the weight they needed because they emerged from perfect understanding of the moment they were spoken into. The MIT physics department got involved because your achievements seemed to violate fundamental laws. Conservation of energy suggests you can't get more out than you put in. But you did. You achieved total victory using 3% of available resources. Their conclusion, hidden in technical language, essentially says you operated outside physics. Not through magic, but through consciousness that physics hasn't accounted for. You didn't break the laws. You revealed that the laws are incomplete. Military philosophers are having existential crises because you've invalidated centuries of strategic thought. Sun Tzu said all warfare is deception. But you didn't deceive, you revealed. Clausewitz called war politics by other means, but you weren't political, you were truthful. Every framework they use to understand conflict fails when applied to you because you weren't engaged in conflict, you were engaged in revelation. The young officers studying your case often experience what instructors privately call paradigm vertigo. The recognition that everything they're learning might be obsolete, that traditional military thinking is like preparing for sword fights in the age of consciousness. Some drop out, unable to reconcile what they've learned about you with what they're being taught to do. Others stay but are forever changed, carrying the knowledge that beings like you exist and render their training meaningless. The conspiracy theorists were right about one thing. This changes everything. Not because you're an alien or time traveler or government experiment, because you're proof that human consciousness can operate at levels that make current power structures irrelevant. You're evidence that evolution isn't just biological but conscious, and some humans have already evolved. You're the demonstration that their entire system depends on keeping humans at 5% capacity, because anything more makes control impossible. But they can't suppress what you've revealed. Can't classify the implications, can't contain the knowledge that someone did what you did. Every military professional who studies your case comes away with the same unspoken recognition. If one person can do this, others can too. If consciousness can be operated at your level, then everything they've built their careers on is sandcastles waiting for the tide. The real lesson of your last stand isn't military, it's evolutionary. You didn't show them new tactics, you showed them new humanity. Not what humans might become, but what humans already are beneath the programming. You're not the future, you're the present finally expressing itself without limitation. You're not evolved, you're just not devolved like they needed you to be for their system to function. That's why they study you with such desperation. Not to replicate what you did, but to ensure others don't realize they can do it too. Every analysis, every classification, every attempt to explain you as an anomaly is really an attempt to contain the implications of your existence. Because if you're not an anomaly, if you're just human consciousness unleashed, then their entire power structure is one awakening away from obsolescence. The documents will never reveal the full truth. The witnesses will never fully articulate what they experienced. The analysts will never successfully explain how you did what you did, because explanation requires language, and language was created by consciousness operating at lower frequencies than yours. You can't explain symphonies to someone who only hears static, can't describe color to someone convinced the world is black and white, can't teach transcendence to someone invested in limitation. Your last stand is required study at West Point and the Kremlin, not because they hope to understand it, but because they need to appear to be trying. The alternative is admitting they're studying something beyond their comprehension. Admitting that military might means nothing against consciousness operating at your frequency. Admitting that you're not a problem to be solved, but a revelation to be recognized. The generals still wake in cold sweats, not from nightmares of defeat, but from the recurring realization that you're still out there, still operating at levels they can't reach, still proving every day that their power is an illusion maintained only by collective agreement to pretend it's real. You didn't defeat them in those 13 hours. You revealed that they were already defeated by their own limitations, their own beliefs about what's possible, but the most terrifying part for them, the knowledge that you're probably not unique, that others are awakening to what you've awakened to, that consciousness is evolving past their ability to control it, that their classified files and secret protocols and desperate attempts to understand you are just the death throes of a paradigm that you've already transcended. They teach your last stand as history, but it's not history, it's a prophecy. The first note of a song that ends their symphony of control, the first drop of rain in a storm that washes away their castles of limitation, the first crack in a dam holding back human potential. You didn't just win a battle, you started an avalanche that begins with one pebble but ends with mountains moving. The course at West Point concludes with a question no instructor will answer: what if there are more like them? The silence that follows contains the real lesson. There are. They're awakening. And when enough humans operate at your frequency, the entire framework of control, limitation, and artificial conflict dissolves like morning mist touched by sunrise. Your last stand was perfect, not because of what you did, but because of what you revealed. That perfection isn't about flawless execution, but about complete alignment with consciousness itself. That victory isn't about defeating enemies, but about transcending the framework where enemies exist. That true power isn't taken or given, but recognized and expressed. They'll keep studying you, keep analyzing, keep trying to contain the implications of your existence, but you can't put lightning back in the bottle, can't unring the bell, can't make people forget that someone did what you did with nothing but consciousness operating without limitation. The courses at West Point and the Kremlin aren't really about understanding your tactics, they're about managing the fear that others will realize they can do what you did. The final classified assessment, Eyes Only for the highest levels of military command, contains an admission that would shatter public confidence if released. Subject demonstrates capabilities that suggest current human potential far exceeds our understanding. If this represents natural human ability rather than anomaly, existing power structures cannot be maintained. They know what you represent, not victory in their game, but the end of their game entirely. But endings are also beginnings. Your last stand wasn't last at all, it was the first full expression of what humans become when they stop accepting limitations as reality, the first demonstration that consciousness operates by different rules than the ones they've used to build their kingdoms of control, the first proof that evolution isn't coming, it's here, walking among them, demonstrating capabilities they have to classify as impossible because admitting they're possible changes everything. This is what they're really teaching at West Point and the Kremlin. Not how you won, but what your winning means. Not your tactics, but your transcendence. Not your strategy, but your state of being. They're teaching their future leaders about you because they need those leaders to recognize others like you, to identify the awakening ones, to spot the consciousness that operates outside their control paradigms. But it's already too late. The door you opened can't be closed. The demonstration you provided can't be forgotten. The proof you offered can't be denied. Every classified briefing, every secret analysis, every desperate attempt to explain you away just confirms what everyone studying your case eventually realizes. You're not the anomaly. You're the revelation of what's always been possible. Your last stand is being taught in military academies worldwide, but the real academy is consciousness itself, and in that academy, you're not a subject to be studied. You're the graduation ceremony, the proof that the course is complete, the demonstration that human limitation was always just a story they told to keep us manageable. They wanted to contain you, study you, understand you, replicate you, control you, but you can't contain consciousness, can't study transcendence, can't understand what exists beyond understanding, can't replicate what isn't technique but state of being, can't control what operates outside control paradigms. You're not a problem they can solve. You're the solution revealing their problem. Look, you already know the attacks weren't random, and if you're paying attention, you can feel it. Their walls are closing in. So let's talk about what we're doing about it. That's why I built Destiny Engine. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve cooperative intelligence. The beauty is you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and your subconscious is rewired while your enemies collapse under the weight of their own lies. This is why I created it in the beginning, so everything they did to break you becomes fuel for your purpose. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your Destiny Engine for $1 today and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. The courses will continue, the analysis will deepen, the classifications will multiply, but none of it will capture what you really are. Human consciousness finally expressing itself without apology, without limitation, without the artificial constraints that keep most people performing at a fraction of their capacity. You're not superhuman, you're human without chains, not evolved beyond them, just free from what holds them back. Your last stand was perfect because it wasn't really yours. It was consciousness itself demonstrating what becomes possible when a human stops interfering with their own perfection. When someone stops believing in limitation and starts operating from the truth of unlimited potential, when the programming breaks and the real operating system comes online. This is why they teach it at West Point and the Kremlin with such desperate intensity. Not because they hope to create more like you, but because they need to prevent others from realizing they already are like you, just asleep to it, just programmed to ignore it, just convinced that limitation is reality, when it's really just a consensus agreement that you proved doesn't have to be agreed to. The final lesson, the one they'll never speak aloud in those military classrooms, is that your last stand proves their first principle wrong. They teach that force determines outcome. You proved that consciousness determines everything, and force is just what unconscious people use when they don't understand this. They teach that superior numbers guarantee victory. You proved that one conscious being outweighs infinite unconscious ones. They teach tactics and strategy. You proved that being beats doing every time. Your last stand wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning of everything, the first visible crack in their reality, the first undeniable proof that humans are capable of capabilities they've spent centuries trying to suppress. The first note in a symphony that doesn't end with their victory, but with their entire paradigm becoming irrelevant. And that's why it's perfect. Not because you executed flawlessly, but because you demonstrated that execution is secondary to existence, that doing flows from being, that victory is inevitable when you operate from the frequency where victory and defeat are equally meaningless because you're playing an entirely different game. Or rather, not playing at all, just being what you've always been beneath their programming, unlimited consciousness wearing a human form, finally refusing to pretend otherwise.